Okay, we're back. This is the beginning of our fourth tape of Aunt Edna's story. We have completed 3 tapes before, which is 6 hours, and we're on our fourth tape, and it's January 30th, 1993. It's about 20 minutes of 3. And so I was telling Aunt Edna that I'm going to get over here so that you know there's actually a person behind this voice.
Another person
so
with a voice.
Now we're going to pose together.
Yeah.
Here we are. Okay, we'll look at the camera. So now you know, and Edna said we're not going to be so serious. We're going to laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so now when you hear the voice, you know there is actually a person behind there. Okay.
Exactly who it is.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
We won't say who, but it's a person.
Yeah. The person that's doing the driving.
I don't know if it's driving or what. Maybe I'm just riding.
Well, I know this, that I wouldn't be able to stay with the subject if you weren't there to direct me.
Well, maybe I'm asking too trivial questions.
No, I like what you're asking.
But I
like what you're asking because it can lead us off into a proper area, and there would be questions that people who are viewing would like to ask.
You know, I've heard interview programs before. I've always said, why doesn't he ask this?
Yes.
And he never asks that question. And you never find that information on.
No.
So that's why I actually ask.
Oh, I don't think you're doing any damage whatsoever.
No damage. Well, we can always get more tapes. I have a question now about Risby. You had the stove in the middle, and you kept pretty warm. As a child, you didn't remember freezing. Was there a piano or organ?
I think it was a piano. And Edith was the pianist out there.
Could there have been a pump organ?
For several years. I don't, as soon as she was confirmed, I think, they were ready to ask her to serve in that capacity. And she liked to do that. The same thing was true here when we came to Bethany Church. Dr. Eugene wanted Edith to play the organ in Bethany Church, but he went to Dr. Rossi and asked him if Edith was capable, and he said, by all means, just tell her.
And Wallen was her instructor?
No, Dr. Rossi was her. Wallen was her piano instructor.
That's what
and Dr. Rossi was her organ instructor.
Okay, getting back to the Risby Church, there could have been an organ, a pump organ maybe? There wasn't a pipe organ then?
Oh, no, it was just an ordinary, old-fashioned organ. The kind that they had in churches at that time.
Was there a pulpit in that church?
There was, it seems to me that the pastor didn't have a pulpit, that he preached right from the altar.
Was it a lectern? Did he have a stand?
I can't remember that, but he must have had. And it might have been that he moved to the side also, but I have no definite, clear vision of that right now.
Describe the altar, Edna, would you? Describe the altar.
Oh, they had a lovely altar. I don't remember if I can say what it was like. I think most in terms of the altar in the Zion Church in Suya, there they had painted on the wall back of the altar, "See Islam, see the Lamb of God," and it was painted on the wall. And I can remember that so distinctly from 1901 when I was lying with my head in my mother's lap, looking up at that, and then I went to sleep.
Were there any paintings in the Risby Church? Paintings of Christ?
It doesn't seem to me like there was anything of any consequence. There must have been something back of the altar ring there to kind of finish it up as a church edifice.
Was there any statues or candle? Was there candelabra?
I can't remember. See, they so rarely had night services.
No, but were there candles for certain times of the year.
But they would just have to bring them in for that occasion.
You didn't have any candle lighters.
I don't think so.
At Christmas you may have.
No, I think the service out there was so unostentatious as it could be. Just very quiet and unobtrusive in every way.
Did you use an Augustana Synod hymn book, a ritual book?
Yes.
Was
we
it
sang in the old psalm book.
Was it similar to the black Augustana hymnal that I grew up with, or was it did it predate that?
I'm pretty sure it's the one that you can remember. If you can remember that there was any Swedish.
No, there wasn't in.
See, we had a good translation of it too, and I can't remember. But for all the years up until after my confirmation, everything was Swedish.
I was going to ask that too.
And then when we, in 1918, when we came here, then there was a question there, and the young people could vote on it, and if they wanted to have English. And most of them voted that they'd rather not have English once a month. The reason, but they didn't say it out loud, was that they knew that Dr. Virgin wasn't up to preaching their type of English.
His English was not good.
Dr. Virgin, he was so well versed in Swedish. He preached a terrific Swedish sermon, but he would have his sermons written in Swedish and he'd translate them. A lot of people didn't know that, but man was so brilliant that he could read a Swedish sermon and translate it from the pulpit. And then there would be words that he'd run up against that he couldn't remember what the word was, and he'd have to substitute something, and sometimes things would turn out kind of funny. And I know that Edith and I noticed it several times. And Dad, of course, he scarcely ever made anything critical remark, but he couldn't help but see it too.
You know, I remember Virgin.
Do you?
I don't know when he left the church. When did he die? And
he died Dad died in the summer of '43. Dr. Pilblad died about the 1st of December '43, and Dr. Virgin died in April of '44.
Did he continue as a pastor until his death?
I think so.
Did he really?
He preached. He wasn't the top man, but he preached regularly.
Well, now did he step aside, and was there another pastor then at Bethany Church?
Well, I don't know if Philemon Smith had come or not.
I don't know.
I can't remember.
All I know is that I remember Virgin, and you know one thing I remember? He talked about human beings a lot, and I got hungry. He talked about human beings, and a lot of times after church we would go and eat at you and Edith, and you'd have dinner, you'd invite us over, and you served lima beans occasionally. And I thought I was only 3 or 3.5, and when he talked about human beings, I got so hungry. That's one thing I remember he talked about, nothing else. But I can see him up in the pulpit and getting hungry.
Yeah.
I didn't know for a long time that he was speaking of something else.
No, Dr. Virgin was 1 in a million.
We'll get back to that later, but let's finish on the Risby. There had never probably been an English service there then. There never was an English.
As long as I was there was nothing but Swedish. I think that shortly thereafter, when they had a summer event, they would have it outside in the yard, a picnic. The only time I ever went to one of those was in the summer of '29, when I was at summer school in Boulder. And I rode up to Risby with Dr. Pureblood's.
Was it a reunion or a community picnic or
It
what?
was an old-fashioned Risby picnic
A reunion type?
reunion of all the people that wanted to come.
Okay, that would in 29. That would have been the
29.
50th year. That would have been 50 years after.
At midsummer time. And Helgi was driving.
Helgi
Helgi
Pureblood.
and Julia and Dr. Pureblood and I. That was all there were in the car. And I can't remember for sure if I rode up with them or if I only rode home with them. It seems to me like there was somebody else from down here that was up there for the summer, and they brought me up there from Boulder. And then
you were going to school? Where you say you're going to school?
I'm going to summer school at university.
There in Boulder?
In 29, yeah. But I can remember that Helga was driving, and we had a lot of interesting conversation on the way back home. It was nice.
Another question. Was the church ever rented by any other groups, like for picnics or anything, you know?
I have no knowledge of that. I have no recollection. I have a feeling that they wouldn't have been willing.
Well, who maintained it? If it would close its door, did the Longmont Church maintain it? Elam, you said. It was Elam Church?
No, the Risby people, they still claimed the church.
Did they maintain it?
And they maintained it.
Even though it was not open for services?
They saw to that it was kept clean and in good working order.
It was not vandalized.
It was never vandalized.
Now, nowadays, a church that would be left unattended would be probably vandalized.
In our day. But right across the street was the old parsonage.
Did someone continue living there?
There were people living there. They didn't belong to us.
Did the church lease that
But
building?
they kept their eyes open.
Okay, did the church lease that home or just let them use it?
I think that the church leased it to these people. I've forgotten. I did know who the people were that lived there. There were some good substantial people in the...
And they probably, one of the agreements was that they would observe the church.
I think so.
Okay, another question. Did they continue to use the cemetery after the church closed?
They still use the cemetery because there are still some old-timers that want to be buried there. And I read some funeral not too long ago that was buried out there. So I know that it's still being used.
Would the state of Colorado now be the supervisor of the cemetery?
I think so. I think that when some of this went to the state historical, that the state of Colorado
okay, the Lutheran Church gave up their supervision.
The Lutheran Church as such doesn't exist anymore.
No, what I'm asking is there any Lutheran organization that helps maintain that church? They have completely gotten out of that?
I really don't know. I haven't been in close contact with anybody in Longmont in recent years.
Okay.
My friends, practically all of them have died.
I understand.
Now, in the days when the Fridstrom boys were still living, I could ask them, and I know I did ask them, and they kept me alive to certain things.
Okay, they went to Risby Church. Did they not?
They went there regularly, not as members. They always were members of Longmont, but they drove up there. And whenever there was anything special at Risby, they'd be there.
Now, they wouldn't have been buried at the Risby Cemetery.
Oh, no. No, the Fridstrom graves are close to ours.
They're in Longmont.
In Mountain View. And I know that area, and I know a lot of the old-timers who are buried close to us.
So, if someone wants to be buried, I mean, if some family member chose to be buried in Risby Cemetery, they would contact the state or purchase a lot, or maybe the state would give them a lot.
When Mother died, Dad bought a lot which contains 8 burial lots. And So, and my marker is there, but right back of us are 4 more. Now the Cemetery Association, Mr. Alberg wrote that and says, we can't do anything about it, but if anybody should ask and would be wanting to be buried in that area, you would be in contact with them right away. So that, as far as I know, they'll be in our family name forever.
Is that lifetime or eternal perpetuity?
That's
forever.
That's forever. I don't know the contract. I've forgotten how they say it, but it can't be terminated. But Alberg said we can't do anything. We can't take it on ourselves.
So a family member 100 years from now could choose to be buried there.
If somebody in the family would want to be buried there, they would prove that they had a right to, and they would. So there's room for 4 more graves.
I see.
And
that's interesting.
I have a couple of letters from Alberg here that I have saved them because I just figured that sometime somebody will perhaps want to know a little more.
Is Alberg the director of the cemetery?
He's the undertaker.
There in Longmont?
In Longmont.
And he also would have authority to work with the cemetery?
Yeah, all of the undertakers that have buried people there, they have such close contacts that they can go and talk to whenever they let's see, what's the name of the cemetery? Mountain View Cemetery. That they meet at regular intervals, and it's a big cemetery now. It's grown through the years.
The records would be kept current, so someone could go talk to Alberg.
Yeah, they're kept up to date.
I see.
So that the city of Longmont, undoubtedly, whenever the city books are kept, the cemetery books would be kept also. And of course, it's a big area now. It originally was just 1 block square. And then they wanted to buy the next block to the west of it. But the lady that owned that, she wasn't about to. She had all kinds of objections. So what did they do? They bought the next block beyond that.
And squeezed her out.
And there she sits in between. And then they bought a strip on the north side so that you can drive in and drive around and drive out.
Oh, does that lady still own her property?
I don't have any idea. She'd be 125 years old.
Well, yes, I know. I wondered if that block would be.
She wasn't anybody that was any.
What my question is, has the cemetery encompassed that area now? Do you know? It doesn't really matter.
Oh yes, one of the last times out there, I don't know, Edith and I were there in the cemetery one time, and I know we talked about it, that it didn't belong to the lady anymore. It was evident that we had a lot of graves in there. So and we needed them. So it's a big cemetery. It's a square block here, and then this square block in between, and a square block there, and a strip on the north side, which is undoubtedly, it might be 3 blocks long that way too.
Sure.
And but I do think that in the vicinity, they have another cemetery beside Mountain View.
Was your dad and mom's and Edith's in the original the east section?
They are, wait a minute. They're right close to the Fridstrom graves. No. I almost think if I'm not entirely mistaken, they're at the beginning of the area that came around on the north side. I'm not sure. But there are, when I think of some of the old timers that are buried, now the Emmons grave is within just a couple of 100 feet from us. And the Emmons, of course, they were old, substantial Episcopalians. And the Empsons, the same way. Those graves are just within a stone's throw of our graves.
And that's the early section.
That's the early section, the original section. And they, see, Mother died in 1913. So at that time, there hadn't been need of spreading out very much. So we're in the oldest section.
I see. Okay.
I'm pretty sure of that. I don't think that we, but we're pretty close to where the portion that runs north is set up. But it seems to me like all the graves, stones that are nearby that I can remember, there are the old timers. I just wouldn't want to hazard a guess on that.
Sure. Well, Aunt Edna, before we leave Risby, the topic of Risby Church, is there anything else you want to visit about that church? Any interesting stories or incidents?
Well, I'll think of them tomorrow, very likely, because it would be interesting if I can remember what pastors are buried out there. I know that there are one or two, at least, of the early pastors that were buried there.
That cemetery is still maintained pretty well, I would think.
Oh yes, it's well cared for. I have never heard otherwise. It's very nicely, and it's up there on the top of the hill. See, it's back in the church, and you can see the whole valley out beyond here. And there were, and I know Edith and I, the last time we were there, we noticed some of the old stones, markers. They're so ancient.
They're starting to deteriorate.
Oh yes, in those days, you know, they didn't know how to keep.
And they didn't use high-grade marble.
No, no.
They had the old white stones.
Yeah.
And about the only way, I have actually gone to some old grave markers and taken a piece of paper and a pencil and gone over the indentations, and that way you can read it.
Yeah.
You can't hardly read any other way.
No.
But that's one way you can recover some of the writing. If we think of something else, we can ask. You spoke, Edna, of your car in 1912. The first car in the area. Would you tell us about that?
I was a child. I didn't realize that Dad and the boys went from Milo Rice to Denver one day. I think it was the 2nd of July of 1912. And I didn't know why they went. I just thought they were going to have a good time. But Milo Rice took them down there, and that's when they bought the car. And
did you know that they were going to buy a car?
No, I didn't.
Did your mother?
I don't think. I doubt Mother knew. They were just going to go to Denver, just look around and see what they could see.
There were no car dealerships in Longmont.
Milo Rice was.
But they thought they could get a better deal, and
see, Milo Rice was our neighbor. Lived right beyond the Turners. And
on the way to town.
And he was a funeral director. Because he had mothers. He had mothers.
But he lived in the country.
And he lived in the country.
And he was a funeral director?
Funeral director.
Was his funeral parlor in the country?
Was it what? No, I don't. I remember where Milo Rice's office was. It's on 4th Avenue, just about downtown. you come up on Main Street and just turn the corner, and you'd come to Milo Rice's place, which is about the middle of that block facing north. And then you'd go to the next corner, and then you'd be by the Methodist Church, and you'd go on another block, and then turn south, and halfway into the block, that's where the old Elim Church was.
I see.
And that's where Alberg's plot is now.
His funeral home is there now.
It's there now.
The old church.
The old church has been made into a funeral home.
Okay, Milo Rice was the car dealer and also a mortician.
Mortician.
And he had a funeral parlor.
Yeah.
And he farmed, lived in a farm.
And he had a small farm place there, a quarter of a mile north of us. I imagine there were 4 or 5 acres or something like that.
He probably didn't actively farm.
No, I don't think so. And I think by that time he had moved into town. Anyway, he wasn't up in our area.
What, did he also have a funeral? Did he also have a furniture store?
No,
I'm sorry.
I don't think so.
Okay. He didn't have any other business besides a car dealership.
No, I don't think so.
And he's a mortician.
I had no recollection.
He sounds like quite an enterprising man.
He was a splendid businessman. He had awful high standards.
What automobile dealership did he have that you recall?
The car that we bought was an EMF, Everett, Mitchell and Flanders.
Everett,
and
Mitchell,
it was the forerunner of the Studebaker.
EMF.
I don't know which one really had the closest connection with Studebaker, but it became the Studebaker because our second car was a Studebaker.
What year was the second car?
I think we must have had the old EMF about 3 years when we got the second car. And I think it was the Studebaker that we drove in in 1918 when we came here.
I see.
And then a couple years after that, we sold it and got a Nash. And the Nash was the next
Okay, we'll talk
big
about
man
that.
in the company. And he was also connected with the
EMF?
with the Studebakers.
Oh, okay. So the EMF company must have dissolved into the Studebaker by 1915.
Yeah.
So they no longer made EMFs after yours.
And then it became the Nash.
After the Studebaker.
And then after the Studebaker, and
of course, the Studebaker continued to be made until the 50s.
I don't know exactly.
Yeah, it did. Or maybe even later than that.
After we had the Nash, I think we must have gone to something smaller. We may have gone down to the Chevrolet. I don't remember just what we did.
Okay, describe that EMF. Was it a touring car? Was it a sport? Was it a coupe, or was it?
It was a 5-passenger, a touring car, and it had. Well, we could latch on the curtains.
Side curtains?
Outside curtains.
For winter travel.
Yeah.
It probably didn't have much of a heater.
No. No, you didn't. When we were coming here in 1918, we didn't have much heat in the Studebaker either. Because I know I was so desperately cold.
Yes, you've told about that, and later on I want to hear that story. That'll be a good story. But I want to keep on with this EMF. You were the first to have a car in the area, not in town, but in the area.
No, the Forbuses always, as long as I knew the Forbuses, they always had cars, and I think they had Hudsons. And then about the same time as we got our car, the McCaslins did. But those 3 cars were all in that area for some time.
Now you came there in 1904. Would the Forbuses have had a car that early?
The Forbuses, I think they must have gotten it shortly thereafter.
Those are the early cars because.
I know that we thought about the Forbuses driving, and I can remember the Forbus boys. See, Harold, the middle one, was my age, and then there was the younger one, Neil, and he died blood poisoning, and Walter, the older one, was slightly older than Edith. And the Forbeses were just delightful people. They were old-time English stock. And Mrs. Forbes was a Davis from Ness City or Scott City, or one of these western Kansas. And her sister was the first Mrs. Forbes. And she was the mother of the 3 Forbes boys that we knew, and a couple other children that died.
You said one died of blood poisoning?
Neil, the youngest of the 3.
When you were living there?
Uh-huh.
What happened?
Well, the Forbes boys were always curious about things, and during Christmas vacation they were out somewhere, and Neil was trying to dig out something from a haystack with his bare hands, and he must have gotten into something. Maybe some insects or something bit him, because a few days afterwards his hand was all swollen. And I can remember how swollen his hand was, and he was in school. And then he wasn't in school, and a couple days afterwards they said Neil died.
How old would he have been?
He was my age, a year younger. And I think that let's see, it undoubtedly was several years, couple years or so before Mother died. I just can't say for sure.
He may have been, what, 10, 11, 12, something in that age?
Harold was my age, and I have an idea that I was about 12, and I have an idea that Neil was about 10. And we all went to his funeral, and it was in I can't remember for sure if he was buried in the north side around the old United Brethren Church, or if he was on the south side.
In Hygiene?
In Hygiene. I'm not sure. I kind of think he was on the south side.
And they went to the United Brethren Church in Hygiene?
They had, the old United Brethren Church in Hygiene, that had gone out of existence. Well, it didn't until about the last years we were there. And they still had it, and the Forbeses family apparently were still members of that. They hadn't transferred to the Methodist Church yet.
So there was Harold, and then Neil, who died, and then a younger brother?
The oldest brother, Walter.
Walter.
A little older than Edith.
I see.
And then I can remember that the first year I was in school there, Mrs. Forbes came to visit. Well, it turned out that Mrs. Forbes was a bride, and she was the sister of the first Mrs. Forbes.
They were sisters of married brothers?
They married the same husband.
Oh, the first Mrs. Forbes died?
She had died.
And left these boys?
And
was she the mother of Walter and Neil and Harold?
The first Mrs. Forbes was.
Yes.
So they always talked about Aunt Edie.
Who was their stepmother?
Their stepmother.
So their Aunt Edie was also their stepmother?
Yeah.
Was she much younger than the first Mrs. Forbes, or?
No, I think that, I don't think she was too many years younger. She might have been 4 or 5 years younger or so.
Do you remember the first Mrs. Forbes?
No.
She had died.
She had died. She was gone. And see, this was the first year we were out there.
So when you were there, Edie had not married Mr. Forbes yet?
She was married sometime that first year.
I see.
And about the time, well, her first baby was born the day after Neil's funeral.
Oh my.
I remember that Miss Davis said something about Mrs. Forbes, and I said she was there, and we had all seen her. But I said she was there, and I saw her get into the buggy. And they were. Next morning, then we learned that the boys had
a little sister,
a little brother.
Isn't that sad?
His name was George.
They lost a little brother, and then they had a new little brother.
And they had this was the second baby. No, the first Ruth was a full
sister
of theirs. Their mother was the mother of Ruth Forbes, but she died.
Did she die in childbirth?
I kind of think she died in childbirth, and the baby died.
Oh.
So then.
Then this became the second.
Then he married.
Oh, okay.
Edith Estelle Davis, and she became the boy's stepmother. And the day after Neil's funeral, George Meredith was born, and he lived a couple weeks, and he died.
Oh.
And then the next child, I have a feeling there was another one, but then Virginia Banks, that writes to me, Virginia Forbes, was the oldest of Aunt Edie's children that lived.
I see.
And she had a sister, Marjorie.
Okay, so Virginia was born then after George died, within what, year or so, whatever. And then there was Margaret?
Marjorie.
Marjorie.
And I have a feeling that there was another baby boy that died. I know there were two Ruths, and then there was George Meredith. And
the first Ruth died?
The first Ruth died, and the second Ruth died.
Oh.
Because I remember the boys talking about the second Ruth, that when she was born, and they were so delighted to think they had a little sister.
But she died at infancy?
Then she died after several days.
Edna, was this commonplace for children to die so young and for mothers to die?
They had no way of seemingly taking care of those situations.
Was it a fault of the midwifery or health, or what caused that?
I just don't think that the prenatal care was sufficient.
But now, in your case, all you children lived except the girl, the first Edith. But that was not in infancy.
She died because the doctor gave her too strong medicine.
Yes.
But
other than that, all your siblings lived.
All of us lived. And Mrs. Matilda Wilson was the midwife.
Can I ask you, did the midwives must have had something to do with the success of the children living?
She was outstanding in her work. I've always heard that.
So what we're saying is poor attention could have caused the deaths of these infants and their mothers.
Yeah, I think that it was just poor prenatal care and the situation at the time of the birth. I know that when we heard that the baby had died, that was born the day after the Neil's funeral, it just seemed so dismal, it's so unreal. But she went right on living, and after a while, then she had these two little girls that grew up. And of course, Virginia especially, she just was so fond of George, and she just loved to write to him because George could write such good historical things for her.
Is Virginia still living?
She lives in Boulder.
Do you communicate?
And I'll be writing to her now before Valentine's Day.
Well, you tell her that you're telling the story to your nephew.
I will.
Tell her that your nephew greets her. I've never met her, but that would be an interesting story to hear
Uh-huh.
Now, the boys, Walter and Neil's, what was the other boy?
Harold.
They don't live.
No, Harold lived the longest. Walter died a good many years ago, and he was middle-aged. And then Harold lived some longer, but he's been gone a long time. But he was my age.
Edna, I want to ask about this Neil's death. That had to be incredibly traumatic for those other two boys to lose their brother.
See, he dug out something out of the haystack.
But the three boys are playmates.
And they were playing, and something stung him. I remember Miss Davis saying that I saw him. He was in school, and he had it wrapped up, and it was all badly swollen. I saw him a couple times.
He went to Pella School.
He went to Pella, yeah.
And here, Edna, I'm going to ask you, how did you feel about this, losing one of your classmates?
At that time?
Yes.
Well, we were just devastated as far as that's concerned. Just thought it was the most terrible thing that had ever happened to us.
That was a hole there.
Yeah. It just...
not only in the Forbes family, but it was a hole in the community.
The whole community, yes.
I mean, it left a...
We always thought of the Forbes family as being the center of the biggest tragedies that had happened in our area. We were also very fond of the Forbeses.
Well, let me ask you, because I'm asking these things because I'm curious. Did it make you think of your own mortality? I mean,
Oh, well, I'm sure it did.
Did you talk about this, or is it something
I don't think any of us were up to talking about it. Edith and I might have said a word or two, but we didn't talk about it. We just weren't up to it.
It was something you just kind of... You grieved to yourself.
Yeah, that's the way. I never talked about any of the deaths of my friends until... I don't think we talked... I think the first time that we really talked was when Erickson, one of the boys that sang in the choir that was such a good friend of Edith, and he's a cousin of the Sundberg boys. His mother, I think, was a sister of the Sundbergs. But I remember that Edith and I talked about his death and some of the things that, see, your dad was so very fond of Carl Erickson too. And I can't remember anything definite to say about it now, but I just have the feeling about the closeness and how much we appreciate it. And he sang, he sang tenor, so he stood beside George in the choir. I know they shared a book.
Did he die suddenly, or he just died? Carl Erickson died.
He was sick for several days and then died.
But you did talk with Edith about his death.
Yeah, at the time, Edith and I, we talked about it, but I can't remember what we said.
And you feel that that's one of the first times you actually spoke about death?
I think so.
Edna, can I ask another question? Was death something to be feared or respected or dreaded, or how was it? See, I'm in a different era.
Yeah.
And now with medical care as such, I don't worry about imminent death. I know I'm going to die. You know, but I intend to live to be 150 years old. I've made that comment. If I'm healthy.
Yeah.
Because if now we are learning a lot about health, but in those days, see, I can go up here to the cemetery up by Coronado Heights, Smoky Hill Cemetery, and you can see grave markers where 4 or 5 children and maybe the mother died within a week.
Yeah.
Or maybe just 4 or 5 children died. Wouldn't that mother and wouldn't that family go insane? How could you stand that kind of pain? My question is, the shock and trauma, you couldn't even address death then, could you?
Well, I'll tell you, back in 1915, Edith and I were with Dad at a 50th anniversary celebration of the Zion Church. And we were out in the cemetery one day because grandfather and our little sister were buried there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking there and I said, Dad, look here. I said, here are the Bloomsters. And it listed Mrs. Bloomster and 3 or 4 children. They had all died within a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and then, is that correct? I said, and Dad talked a little about it. Yes, he said that was correct. It was diphtheria.
Mm-hmm.
They died of an illness. It just swept through the family.
An epidemic may have gone through the whole community.
They were all members of Zion Church, and they were our neighbors.
And the father was left?
Father was left.
And maybe some brothers and sisters?
I think Will Bloomster and one more. I don't know if it was his sister or brother. And then he remarried, and then he had several more children. But the second wife was not so vulnerable.
Well, my question is, how did they go on? They had to.
They had to. There wasn't any choice. They no. I thought of that when we were out there. Edith and I were out there in the cemetery in hygiene, and I know that in 1915 when I talked with Dad about the Bloomsters, that those things could happen. But when Edith and I were out in the cemetery around the old, what was the old Dunkard Church, then it was the first time that we realized how many of our close friends, the Affolters to the east, and Zwicks, that were just up across the Hub Zwick was one of Dad's pallbearers, a good friend of ours. And the death that had happened, back there in those days, there was no medical service.
And they truly went from day to day, didn't they?
But they didn't all. And you asked about the midwife that took care of us. Mrs. Matilda Wilson. I forgot whose sister she was, but she was a sister of one of the men that we knew real well. She had lost her husband, and she did this kind of work. And it seems to me that my general impression was that all of her children lived. Mm-hmm. She was very, very
all the children she helped deliver.
Yeah, and I don't think that, I can't remember anyone ever talking about that she had lost any of her children.
She had a gift, and she was undoubtedly better than any doctor.
I think so.
She understood.
But our little sister died. That she was just
what, 2.5?
2.5. So she was a half a year or so older than your dad. Your dad was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I can't remember the dates. Of course, it's all recorded, so we could look it up. But
she was right in between Carl and Dad, wasn't she?
Yeah. And so she would have been.
Dad might have been a baby when she died.
Yeah, but at any rate, she was sick, and then she was getting along pretty well. And they had talked about it, that they didn't think it was necessary for him to drive all the way out. I don't know if he came all the way from Algona or if he just came from Bancroft out there. That they thought that she was well enough that they would be able to take care of her the rest of it. And he decided, he went back in the house.
Who, the doctor?
He went back in the house and looked at her a little more, and then he wrote another prescription. And he gave him that, and then he says, give her this. And they did. And she went into convulsions after an hour or two.
Oh my.
And died.
The doctor killed your sister.
He did. And one of the neighbor ladies that was there helping, I imagine Mrs. Wilson was there undoubtedly as the nurse, and another one. And they said, whatever happened then? Well, the doctor wanted her to have this medicine. And so she tasted it. Oh, she said that. You mean to say you fed that to the child? And it's just about all she could take.
Was it poison? Had the doctor...
Whatever it was, she went into convulsions.
The doctor didn't know what he was doing at all.
He was angry.
Did he try to kill her?
Dad said very definitely that had it been modern times, the law would have been on him right away.
He didn't intentionally kill the child.
Intentionally.
You think he did?
They all the friends, all the relatives was under that impression.
That he poisoned your sister?
That the medicine he gave, it need not have been poison, but it was too strong. So it killed her.
Did that doctor practice? Did he continue to practice?
You know what happened to him? And many years later, when Carl was up in Minneapolis, in that area, he, somehow or other, somebody up there told him that they knew what happened to that man. He was in prison for some reason. He had been imprisoned for mispractice, apparently. And one of the other prisoners had it in for him, and he killed him.
Is that right?
So he died in prison.
Oh my. You made the comment that he was an angry man. What happened?
Huh?
You made the comment that this doctor that gave the medicine to your sister was an angry man. Why? Why do you say that?
I don't know. That was just his nature.
Oh.
He wanted to be, I don't know.
He may have been just a confidence man. He may not have had any medical training at all.
He may not have. No.
You know, men roamed the Midwest.
Yeah.
Most of the doctors were veterinarians, horse doctors.
Yeah. Oh,
And people went to them because actually horses were more valuable than people in many cases.
Well, yeah.
I mean, and so the horse doctor was probably came out here before medical doctors.
See, we've had several sad situations that happened in our family. And
do you want to mention them?
I know Edith said to Mother, "Why didn't you do anything about it?" She said, "What was there to do? What evidence did we have, or what could we say?"
Oh my.
There weren't any of them well versed in law or anything like that.
They didn't have malpractice suits in those days.
No, they didn't have any.
Your father was angry though, was he not?
Oh, I know the family must have been terribly disturbed, but I never heard one word said in the family on any occasion. Mother told this. Mother told Edith and me this.
Mm-hmm. Was that kind of an unspoken trauma? Your family didn't speak of that?
And it wasn't anything that... How could we?
No, but my question is, how did your mother and father and brothers, George and certainly remembered her, how did they handle that grief? They didn't talk about that grief.
They just...
Did they get together and cry on each other, or?
I just don't know. They just couldn't take it. They just had to go out by themselves
and grieve.
Yeah.
And I have heard about young mothers maybe having their young children attacked by Indians or losing them to disease and literally going insane on the spot.
Uh-huh.
Did that happen? How did they handle that trauma? Didn't they almost go insane?
No, the only thing is I've read a little bit in stories or something like that, but they just...
You had to go on.
It was just too much for them to handle.
A part of their emotions would have had to shut down.
Yeah.
Just to survive.
Yeah.
And then they went ahead and had more children.
And then they transferred all their affection
Sure,
to
sure they did.
children.
Sure they did.
And gradually forgot that there had been others.
Yes. And this wasn't unusual. This happened in almost every family.
I think so.
It
Back
wasn't
there in the
rare.
in the pioneer days, I think it could have happened to most anybody.
Well, we got off the subject of the car, and we will get back to that. Can we take a little break?
Yeah, we better.
And then talk for a few more minutes?
We can do that.
Let's take a little break, and I'm going to get some more coffee. Okay, we're back now. It's about 10 to 4, and we're going to go on for another half hour maybe. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have some questions about your first car, the EMF, and Milo Rice and everything. You said during our break that Milo Rice went with your dad and brothers. Would you want to tell that story to Denver?
They went to Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And they went down in the morning. And
did they drive in Milo's car?
And of course we didn't have any car yet.
No,
So
no, I
it was
understand
Milo's
that.
car. But
I mean, you didn't take the train or anything. You went in his car.
I had the remotest idea why they were going. I just thought they were going out on a jaunt.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until they came home in the evening that we found out what had gone down, what the purpose was. Maybe the boys didn't know either when they left home.
Okay, the first to come back, you said, was Milo?
No, Milo, no, let's see. No, Milo brought that, and Milo had a partner, and he was the one that brought George in the car.
Okay, because...
But I can't remember who it was.
Because your brothers nor your father had learned to drive yet.
No,
So
they hadn't, any of them.
So
But George was learning to drive, so he drove a good share of the way home from Denver.
I see. Mm-hmm.
That I can remember when they came home then, that they had. But I don't know if I caught on when they came that there was a car coming along with them. And it seems, vaguely, it seems to me like, well, Dad must have come home with the boys.
In the new car?
With Mr. Milo. That the partner had to bring George. I think so. It had to be that way.
Now George would have been about 23 years old then.
1912.
His birthday was coming up. You said it was July 2nd?
Mm-hmm.
He was a few days short of his 23rd.
Next week.
Was his birthday.
Uh-huh.
Now Edna, getting driver's licenses was not a problem then. They probably didn't even have them.
No, it was strange, and I think of it, it was no problem at all.
They probably didn't even have car licenses then, at first.
No.
You just bought a car and learned how to drive from the dealer.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. I think that was all there was to it.
And that's why there were a lot of wrecks in those days.
Yeah.
There were a lot of wrecks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You describe the car. Was it black? Or was it...
It was, the original car was black, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or a very deep blue. Perhaps, I kind of think maybe it was just a very, very deep blue. Mm-hmm. So it looked black.
During a break you spoke of the headlights, that they had to be lighted by a match.
They were, what is it? Asbestos or something like that? No, what is it? But they had to be lighted by match.
The wick or the element
They, no, I think there was a wick of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure of that.
A filament that could be lighted and. Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there was much night driving. In those
Probably
days.
not. No.
I don't seem to have any memory of that. Most people did their driving in the daytime when they could see the countryside.
Mm-hmm. And you said it had side curtains?
Yeah.
For weather, for cold weather?
Uh-huh.
Was it cranked? Did it have a crank to start? You crawl?
Oh, there weren't any self-starters.
No, it was all cranked.
It had to be cranked, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it had to be cranked, and I think the Studebaker, the next car, I wonder if it didn't have to be cranked too. I'm not too sure of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You said your mother was living. Now, she died within the year after that.
Mother was on several pictures in the old EMF.
Mm-hmm.
We have several pictures of her in there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but by the next year, she had died, hadn't she?
yeah, see, she died in the summer of 1913.
Mm-hmm.
So she lived a year after we had the car. She died on the 13th of June, I think.
Hmm.
If I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Was that a satisfactory car?
For that time, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when it got time to have another one, they didn't want another EMF.
They didn't. Oh, you said it was 5-passenger. There were 6 in your family. Could you all squeeze in the car?
Most of the time when we rode 6, we took the piano stool, took off the swivel off of it, and put the piano stool in there.
Oh.
In the back part. So we sat 4 in the back seat, but the front was divided. Division.
Mm-hmm.
There would have been room for another passenger, but they didn't want to crowd the driver for fear he'd get flustered.
I see. So only 2 sat in the front.
Only 2 sat in front.
And I said 6 in your family. I was wrong. There were 7. There were 7 of you.
Yeah.
Carl and George and Dad and you and Edith.
And let's see. Carl was still going to school in Boulder.
Oh, he wasn't home much.
He wasn't. He was home for the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't come to Bethany until the fall of after Mother died.
Oh, I see.
She died the 13th of June, and he came in September then of 1913.
Okay, so when you all decided to go to Risby Church, you could all 7 pile in if you had to.
Yeah.
You'd make room.
We'd make room. We'd get along.
Mm-hmm. It was only a short drive, and it beat the horse and buggy, didn't it?
Oh yeah. And at first, the only one that drove was George.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else drove, and then gradually, your dad learned to drive right soon, and my dad drove a little, but he was so jittery that he made so many mistakes. It was funny.
You didn't feel comfortable with your father driving.
We were. I know Edith said it right out loud to me that Dad shouldn't be driving. He's just too.
He grew up in another era, and
yeah.
he couldn't adjust to it.
And then as time went on, I can't remember Carl ever driving until the following summer. He drove somewhere, but he didn't drive the EMF more than once or twice, and we didn't want to ride with him anyway. We didn't trust him. And
were they difficult to drive, those early cars?
Huh?
Were they difficult to drive? Do you remember?
I don't know. You had to shift gears all the time, and I don't think that was an easy task by any means.
Was it capable of driving in the mountains?
I think we have a picture in one of the albums where we went to the mountains in the EMF.
Really?
So we could drive up as far as Estes Park.
Oh my!
Didn't have any trouble.
I'll bet that was a 2-day trip, wasn't it?
No.
Could you do that in a day?
I can't remember. It seems to me, yeah, that we drove on up. I think we purposely made a 3-day trip out of it. We drove up to Allen's Park. No, we drove up to where the Spanglers had their summer cottage. We stayed there in that vicinity overnight, and then the next day, then we drove from there to just beyond, just had turned down on the north St. Vrain towards home on the north. So we just went across. We spent a lot of time walking in the mountains and doing things on that trip across there, because we were right here from Longspeak, and we followed right along till we got down to Estes Park.
Edna, you've spoken about being fond of Colorado. That's almost your home.
Uh-huh.
And George has spoke about longing to go back to Colorado. So did Edith.
Yeah.
You were like bonded to the mountains, weren't you? Your family.
We were.
Almost bonded. Almost had a.
We had a strong fondness for the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all did.
Did your father also?
I know he liked, and he knew that we all liked it. And we felt at home with the mountains.
Your reason for coming to Lindsborg was because of George and the irrigation.
I think that was focused on more than anything else.
And the Bethany College?
And Bethany College, naturally. That didn't take the foreground so much, but we naturally knew that it was there, that we were interested in going to college.
You've spoken, like George used to talk to me about almost regretful coming here. The first few summers were dreadfully hot, flies in the horses, working in an area that he always told me that, he told me that he wanted to go back to Colorado and have a little chicken farm. Did he ever speak to you about that?
No, I think that we all understood that his longing was to maybe go up and get a little place up in Hygiene. He would feel at home there. And Edith was always talking about going back.
So there was a little bit of regret after you came to Lindsborg.
When we went out to Colorado, we always talked about home in Iowa.
I see.
But we never really thought of it in terms of moving back. We talked about how it was, but I don't know that we ever expressed a desire of going back there.
Back to Iowa.
But we never felt entirely at home after we'd built the new addition to the house, and that I think we felt more at home out there.
In Longmont?
In Longmont.
Okay.
But we still hadn't settled our roots very much. And when we began to talk about going to California or to Oregon.
You talked about moving there?
See, George went out to Oregon and Washington on an exploration tour. And then that was in sometime during 1917, I don't remember. And then he went on down to Kingsburg, California. That we had friends. The Munsons had moved from Sioux City. They were our nearest neighbors to the north. And Joe Munson was farming out there at Kingsburg, and George spent a couple of days with him.
Was that a farming community, farming area?
Farming. It was a Swedish farming area.
In California?
In California.
Whereabout, can I ask?
And it's in the Sacramento Valley.
Oh, my.
And then he went on up north and was up in Oregon. And then he went as far north as Brush Prairie, Washington. And he visited a number of farmers around in that area. before he came. But he wasn't, I don't think that any of us felt like we would want to go to California. We didn't think that it was sufficiently inviting. And George said very definitely that Oregon was too cold and too dismal. He was encountered some wet days out there.
Well, he was already cold from Colorado.
He didn't.
He didn't want to get colder.
So they came back, so that whenever we talked anything about that, that's cured the idea of going anywhere else. And then when the Augustana Synod was talking up this Pecos Valley in West Texas, and that's, I think, when we cast our first serious vote on whether we were interested in it, and we all voted no. Not Texas. We didn't want to go to Texas. And then there were other places in closer range. We voted a couple of times. I can't remember exactly where.
Your family actually voted?
Actually voted, just out of fun.
Sure.
It was just a huge joke because we all knew how we were going to vote anyway.
Did you take a vote when you wanted to come to Kansas?
I can't remember that we did at all, because
Was it just a consensus?
When we were going to come to Kansas, see, your dad, my dad, they came here to visit, but they just stayed here in this area, and on the various farms out here. See, Dad had been here back in 1903, and
yes.
he had been very much interested in some of these farms.
That's when I asked you that earlier in another tape. But at that time he didn't want to move to Kansas.
No.
Because of your mother?
No, mainly because of the fact that there had been a flood.
Oh, he was afraid of that?
In Kansas City, Kansas, the Union Station had
a high water mark.
Damage up 6 feet high. And Dad saw that in 1903, and he thought, would we want to come into an area which would be devastated with a flood like that?
Well, had Lindsberg had a serious flood when he was here?
It had been all up the Smoky Valley.
Well, then I want to ask, why did he change his mind in 1918 to come here?
Well, I think that he had talked, see, that Carl had been here at school, and and then they came on down here, and he talked with Pete Larson, who was his friend, and Mostrema, and then several people here. Maureen was a real estate dealer, and he became the sheriff, you know, and he talked to several. And I think that they came here very seriously with the thought that this would be it. So they came all prepared to say yes.
And his fears of flooding at that point were less.
The first Sunday that we were here, Mrs. Jenkins invited us all over for Sunday dinner. We hadn't been able to move in the house yet because the furniture didn't come until that night. So the following day we went out there, and Rodney Jenkins and Helen were there, and we were all sitting all around the table, and there was a lot of talk, and there was a lot of interesting things. And Mr. Jenkins asked Dad some questions, and Dad was trying to, and he was telling about when he was here in 1903, and he said there was one farm that he especially liked, and he described it very carefully there around the table as we were eating. I didn't give it any thought what it was they were talking about. And then when they finally came to the end of that conversation, then Albert Jenkins said, well, that's his farm.
Hmm.
We were sitting right on the farm there.
Did he had looked? It had been for sale then.
And we had already bought the next farm east of it.
Mm-hmm.
See?
Oh, that's the farm that Oakleaf lives on now. There was a crossing there, or a railroad switch.
They called it Jenkins Spur.
I see. Mm-hmm.
There also was a sidetrack at the Swanson brickyard.
Hmm. That brickyard was in operation then?
It was in operation for a number of years.
After you came here, was it?
We came here.
I want to hear about that sometime too, but not now.
I don't know enough about it, but I know that when I was going the first year, when I was enrolled at Bethany Academy, I used to walk across the to the north there and cross the field.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'd walk over to the brickyard and start walking down the track
Mm-hmm.
into town.
If it were, yes, I see.
And I walked that many and many a times. And I didn't do it twice a day, but once a day.
Mm-hmm.
Dad would bring me in,
Mm-hmm.
or he would come and meet me
Mm-hmm.
in the evening.
Hmm.
And then it got to the point where I could drive by myself, so I would leave the horse and buggy over in the where Kenny Shugrin is now. In the back there was a little feedlot, and I could leave the horse and buggy there.
And then you'd walk to Bethany.
Now I'll walk up to the school.
Hmm. I have a bunch of other questions about that, or several other questions. I want to get back to Colorado now a little bit.
Yeah.
You took your EMF to the mountains, and you enjoyed the mountains. You said your family's bonded. At one time, you or George told about hiking up Longs Peak.
I walked with George once when we were there, and I don't know if it was when I was with George and Esther, or if Edith was along. I don't remember at all. But I do know that George and I hiked up Boulder Field on the northeast corner of Longs Peak, and we walked up that way, and we went up quite some distance so we could look out over the valley.
You didn't go to the very top.
But we had no intention when we started out to go to the top, but we thought, well, let's walk a little farther, we said.
Mm-hmm.
But we still weren't talking about going all the way up.
That would have been a 2-day trip for
It would have been much too more.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got ready, well, we turned around and came back slowly and looked at everything in front of us, came on down.
Did you do? I see.
I never forgotten what a nice trip it was.
Mm-hmm. Now, they didn't have any roads up any mountains other than Pikes Peak. Did they not have a road up Pikes Peak then?
The road to Pikes Peak, I think, must have been built. It wasn't there, of course, when we were in Colorado Springs, but there were roads into the mountains a short distance. But I don't think that the road up Pikes Peak came into being until, just offhand I might say 1910 or so, something like that maybe.
In the other area, when you took your car up in the mountains, were they roads pretty well maintained, or were they safe?
They weren't bad. The time when we drove up and made a 3-day trip out of it, we drove up to Ferncliff the first evening, and that's where Spangler's had their home, and then a couple of others. I believe Boynton's had one there too, but it was a nice little locate. And we stopped nearby there, and I think we had a tent, so we slept in a tent overnight. And then the next day, then we went on up to Allen's Park, and we went north, and we stopped at Longs Peak Inn, which was right smack in the front of, right down into the valley, and we stopped there at noon. And then we drove on up to Estes Park, and we stopped around in town a little while, and then we drove about a mile east and stopped there, where there was a nice little location where we could well, I don't know, there were some buildings there nearby, but we slept in our tent overnight.
In Estes Park?
In Estes Park.
Now, was it a tourist center then? It is now.
Well, it was a tourist center.
Even then?
To a certain extent then too.
Hmm.
And then the next morning then we got in the car and we drove down the North St. Vrain, and we got down to down towards Lyons. I remember we didn't get home until in the late afternoon, but it wasn't evening by any means.
Was this trip during the summertime?
It was, I can't think of the exact days, but I'm sure it was in July. I think something most likely would jolt my memory, and I could say the exact 3 days. It seems to me like it had something to do with George and Carl's birthdays,
Mm-hmm.
the 6th and the 10th, in through there.
I see. This reminds me of a question I want to ask. Dad spoke of taking a trip to play in the 4th of July celebration in Denver. They took a trip and they played in the band. And sometime I want to ask that question. Maybe you can tell about your brothers all played musical instruments in a band, a local band in Lyon, in Longmont.
Fred Schrader had they called it the kid band. It was a juvenile band, and the boys played in it. And they all went down to Denver and played at the time when the big football game was there, when a team in Chicago and a team in Colorado, and I don't remember which, played football for the championship in Denver.
Was it a college championship or professional?
I don't know. I have a vague notion that it was professional, but I don't know, because I don't think that they had set up to the extent that they could eliminate groups.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was semi-professional, then of course it doesn't matter.
No.
It could,
And Dad and your brothers went there to play for that football game?
Dad didn't go, but
No, my dad and
your dad, yeah, the three brothers went down and played in that band at the time, and they had such a good time.
Mm-hmm.
It really was something that was extraordinary to be able to play.
What year would that have been about, approximately?
Well, let's see, Linus graduated from high school in 1914, and Carl was gone in 1913. He came to Bethany.
I remember seeing.
I don't know if Carl played, if it was just the two brothers, or if Carl played.
Edna, I remember seeing a picture of the boys in this kid band, juvenile band, but they were not that old. Dad may have been 10 or 11, and Carl would have been 14.
Yeah, we have a
15.
good picture of them. It was the juvenile band. That was Schrader's band, and it was his group of boys that played. So it might have been
in the early 1900s.
It would have been. See, I know that the boys went to Greeley once and played at high school football encounter there, and I don't know if they went more than that. But when they went to Denver, I think, I almost think that Mother was still living.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have had to have been either in the early part of 1913 or in 1912.
Hmm.
And in 1912, your dad would have been about, well, he would have been in high school age then.
Mm-hmm. I think the picture I remember seeing, they were younger than that.
Oh.
But I don't
Yeah.
know.
No, I can readily see that.
I don't think Dad would have been 19 years old.
No, I can't think of anything to tie it to.
Mm-hmm.
That.
Well, that was just kind of a side question.
During the night, it might just come to me just like that, and I would know. But that's not something I've thought about for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't say anything definitely.
Well, Edna,
I don't dare make any guesswork.
And Edna, why don't we take a little break now? We've had a long session.
We've had a very nice afternoon.
Yes, and you want to do this again next week?
Huh?
Can we do this again next week?
Yeah, that'll be fine. I'll be right here.
Okay, well, let's do that, and
we'll have more to say.
Well, good. We'll just stop now, and then we'll see you next week. Okay?
And as I said, you talked with Pastor Hawk about the possibility of his viewing our
surely,
and tell him that it's long enough so that he can't count on one day.
No, I don't think so.
No, he's very much interested, and he's eager. It could very well be that he doesn't care about all of it.
No.
But you can, if you talk to him, you can give him a pretty good idea of what parts he might be interested in more than others. I'm sure that he would enjoy the first part of beginning in 1901, what we did the first day.
Well, I think he'd be interested in hearing about Risby Church.
I think so too.
And,
I'm sure of that.
So.
And it's pretty hard now to know where one group.
Well, I think he'll want to listen to it all. I would think he might. So.
Well, just tell him that we can look at a while, and then if he isn't satisfied, why he can come another day, and we can agree on that.
Well, I'll just give him the tapes, and he can take them home and watch them at his own leisure.
Well, that might be a good idea.
Well, we'll see you next.
Because Margaret most likely would be interested.
Could be.
But I think there's this about it, that he will want to ask some specific questions. But he can't do that while he's looking anyway.
Well, he may want to ask some questions and then come in and ask them, or I can ask them of you.
I don't think that he could sit and watch it and interrupt and ask questions.
No, that's not going to work. No. But we don't have to end this at any particular time.
No.
Well, we'll stop now then, and we'll see you next week. Okay?
Yeah. I'll be right here.
Good. Goodbye.
Good.
Okay, we're back, and this is February 6th, 1993. I think this is about our 5th time we've been doing this, isn't it, Aunt Edna?
I think so.
5th time, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's now about 2:15 or 2:30, 2:15, and so we're just going to continue. We've been talking about Colorado and some various things, and so Edna wants to just go ahead and start talking about some things.
I said that first day that I would tell something about the Christmas Eves those 3 years, and that 1901 was the last Christmas that Mother was well. Sometime in the spring following that, she was along on a trip down to the county seat, Algona, and going home, it was dreadfully cold, and Uncle Frank was along, and she said that it feels like something broke in my head. And Uncle Frank got up and stood back over her and put his hands, his big gloved hands, and held her head like that. And he stood that way all the way home to try to keep her head warm. But she had a sick spell following that. If it was a bad cold or what, I don't know. But later, some weeks later, we were visiting the Samuelsons, Willie Samuelson's parents. And I can remember being with Mother in Mrs. Samuelson's bedroom. She was in bed. And George told afterwards that they were a very uncleanly family, and that Mother got the TB germs there, that he was positive. So that she had a bad sick spell in the spring then. And then sometime in the summer, the doctor told them that she ought to go out to Colorado. So that in the fall, just when, I don't know, it wasn't too late in the fall, Dad and Edith and Mother and I, we went out to Colorado Springs on the train. And I have a memory because I told Edith that I can remember Lyman from the last time we were here. But Lyman, you know, wasn't too far from Colorado Springs, and one of the towns there in eastern Kansas. But then we came out to Colorado Springs, and we got a little house at the back of one of the what had been quite a pretentious little house, not very far from church. And it was the coachman's house. The big house was in front. It was empty, nobody living there. But Dad rented this little house in the backyard, and I can remember that. It was a nice little place, and we were there then all winter in this house, and I don't remember very much of anything about living there or what we did at all, but I know we were there as long as all four of us were there. Then in the spring, when Dad and Edith, it was in March, Dad and Edith went back to Iowa, and I can remember the arrangements had been made where we were going to stay with the Gustafsons, which was across the street from this house. And we had a room there, and Mrs. Gustafson fed us and such. And to the best of my memory, as long as I was out there, we stayed with them. The next, when they went back again, when Edith went with her, then I don't think they ever stayed with the Gustafsons. I think they stayed with the Deans. Mr. Dean was a policeman, and they lived on up the street a little farther, and they had a old girl about Edith's age. But at any rate, some of those things about that are rather confusing. I do remember this, that when we lived there, I played with a little boy who lived across the street, and he was a Catholic boy, and he was always talking about Father Grace. That was his priest. And of course, that didn't mean anything, but we had an awful lot of fun together, the two of us. We were about the same age, and we played there. As long as I was there, he was my playmate. Then about the 1st of June, then Mother and I went back to Iowa too. Mm-hmm. So that we had been there through the rest of March, April, May. So 3 months we had been there by ourselves and with the Gustafsons. And to my knowledge, things were pretty nice there. And I remember Mrs. Gustafson. She was very kind to me and to Mother, but they hadn't made any plans beyond that, staying there. But then we went back to Iowa, and on the way back, when we got to Omaha, Mother could feel that the climate was beginning to affect her, and she knew she'd never be able to take the Iowa climate anymore. But I don't know that she said very much, but I can remember then that we were back there, and I think we stayed there. She stayed there until about 6 weeks, perhaps till the middle of July. And then Edith went with her. And then so Edith was going to be her helper. And that's when they went back and lived with the Deans. And no, they first lived with the Olsons. And Olsons had a daughter the same age as Edith. And she was she was a high climber. At any rate, Edith and she got along fairly well, but she was a big it. And I can remember only this statement made in regard to that, that Mother had said that I don't know if she was, well, she was that would have to have been 19, it would have to have been when we were getting ready to move to Colorado. See, Dad went out there. That was when he stopped here in Linford, and then he went on out there. I told you something about stopping here. But there was a church meeting. The various pastors were in at Pastor Youngdahl's, and Pastor Arlene was there from Longmont. When Dad was there, they were asking him questions about, and he told them that he was looking for a place to live, that we were going to have to leave Iowa. And that was when Pastor Arlene said, why don't you come up to Longmont? We have some nice farms. Now he knew personally of several. So Dad went on up there then, and then he bought the Charlie Day place. That's the house that we had here, and we lived there those 15 years until we moved away. But I can remember that first evening when we were there, when I was so deadly sick, getting sick with the scarlet fever. Edith and I were playing out in the swing, and we were having such a good time. We hadn't been together for months, but we were having a real pleasant evening. And they were busy moving things in the house, getting things straightened out, and the boys were working and helping in every way. So that is the memory I have of that evening, and that was the 3rd of November of 1903, because Dad scratched it above the door in the bedroom, and it was still there when we had made additions to the house and so on. They had never erased that. They'd left it there. But then I know that I had some fairly good memories of Christmas, but I don't think I bothered to say much of anything of that, because I had talked about 2 Christmases, and by that time, see, I want to say this, that since I had the scarlet fever, the rest of the family came down with enough. Edith was a little sick, not very much. And George was sick several days, but not at all. And her dad, they were not especially sick, but they were sick enough to know they were sick. But Carl was very sick, and he got the full brunt of it. And so for a couple of weeks he was just really under the weather. And I remember that we always felt that the illness that he encountered at that time affected his stability, that he was more or less sick from that. And he had, as he got older, they said he had catarrh. Catarrh, that was a form of throat. And that they knew was the result of this illness. It was a bad cold that had left him with this. And I have those memories. But as time went on, then the Sunday or one of the days during Christmas that year, see that we came in November, so this was about 6 or 7 weeks later, then we were all reasonably well again. And we took a walk out into the fields, way down to what we called the 40-acre field, down at the southeast corner. And I can remember us walking. Aunt Lyda was with us. And we were walking, coming back, just taking it easy and nice, just beautiful sunny day. I can remember that day very, very clearly. And we came on back, and then it was evening, and never thought about anything more. But it was one of those things that stayed indelibly in my mind. They, as time went on then, Edith started school. Well, and the boys, George and Carl, they all went to school, except me. I was 6 and could have gone, but they kept me home because I was good company for Mother, and she liked to have me there. So I don't have any memories, especially of that summer. But then the next fall, and it was time to go to school, well, then I went to Pella School. So I was going on 7.
Did they call it grades? First grade?
I was in the first grade.
First grade,
then,
okay.
Yeah. And then I remember that there was Lloyd Spencer and Harold and Neil Forbes and Ted McCaslin and Vera McCaslin. She was younger, a little younger. But they were my friends, those boys especially. And we played together. And I remember the Forbes boys. Neil was he was always putting you on the spot. He was always teasing you in some fashion. And Harold would get so mad at him. He said, "Come on," he said, "leave her alone."
Now Harold was younger or older?
Harold was older. He was half a year or so, maybe almost a year older than I. And then Neil was about a year younger.
And then there's Walter.
And Walter was Edith's age.
Oh.
So they were just
a year apart.
Yeah, they were. And
Neil, the youngest then. Neil being the youngest.
Neil was the youngest, and he was the one I told about that was at Thanksgiving, was digging something out of a hay stack, and got into something that gave him blood poisoning, and I can remember his hand was so horribly swollen, and the skin was peeling off of it. And he came back to school, but he wasn't well enough to be in school, and he was home again, and in a few days he died.
They didn't have any way to give him medicine? They didn't have any antibiotics?
I don't know if they had called the doctor or had any contact with the doctor or not. I just don't know that at all. But I know that he died. And
In what year would you have been, what, 3rd or 4th grade then, do you know?
I have an idea that I must have been in the 2nd grade. At a Thanksgiving, after the, see, I don't think I was in the 1st grade.
You had been about 8 years old then?
Yeah, I think so. I had a pretty fair memory of that.
And it was around Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving time when he had this, when he put his hand in the haymow or whatever.
It had to be Thanksgiving time, I think. It could hardly have been as early as Halloween. We might have had a day off then, but I think that it had to be the Thanksgiving vacation. But I don't think that Neil died until early in the next year. That poison, he didn't get satisfactory medical attention. So I imagine that he maybe died in January or February. But I can remember we were all at the funeral in Hygiene, and at the burial. The funeral was at the Forbes house, and I can remember Celia Pulliam was there beside me. She was my age. She lived across the street, and we were there. And then after, well, I can remember so well Mr. Forbes and the boys in their pickup wagon driving home from the funeral, and Miss Davis said, "Well, it's a pretty sad journey home for them," and little things like that. I can remember that. So
Miss Davis was at the funeral too?
yeah, oh yes, the whole school was there.
There was no school that day?
There was no school. No, we were all there.
Was it during a weekday?
It was a weekday, yeah.
Now, Edna, did you view the body or did you not?
We did, but there's nothing that, there wasn't anything strange about that. So that I remembered it, but I know that we did. But I can remember so well the funeral service in the house. The Methodist pastor from Hygiene had that, and talking. The house was just jam-packed with people. Everybody was there, and there wasn't room, sitting places for us. And I know I stood, and Celia Pulliam, she sat on the floor. She sat down on the floor. She wasn't about to stand. But at any rate, we made the best of it. And
that was a sad time for all, wasn't it?
huh?
A sad time for everybody, for everyone.
It was everybody. And I don't remember how many of the family, our family was there. Mother, of course, wasn't there, and Aunt Lida wasn't there. But we children were all there. The brothers were there, but I don't remember them at the funeral or anything. But the next day at school, Miss Davis said something about Mrs. Forbes. Was she at the funeral? And I said, well, I saw a lady get in there in the Surrey that they drove to the funeral in.
You mean to the funeral? By the funeral, you mean to the cemetery. By that, you mean to the cemetery.
Yeah, we left the house going to the cemetery. See, they lived, I would judge, about maybe 3/4 of a mile south and west of the Hygiene Church.
And the cemetery was at the Hygiene Church?
it was the cemetery was around the Hygiene Church. Up to that time, most of the funerals had been in the old Dunkard cemetery across the street, because practically everybody in the early days in Hygiene were members of the Dunkard Church. You know that. And I remember so well the last time Edith and I were out there, we went with Mrs. Forbes to well, it was a meeting of all the old timers at the old Dunkard Church. And at that time it had become a museum. It had been given to the state.
That building is no longer standing, do you know?
I think it's still there. It was an old stone building. And the fact that they gave it to the state, I'm sure it's been preserved. And the most recent that I've been out there, I know that Edith and I were driving the one time and we drove past it, and I'm positive it was still there then.
Was that church, did you say, was in Hygiene or in the country?
It was in Hygiene.
Hygiene, in the town.
In the east edge of town. And the town cemetery was just across the street. So Neil was buried in the town cemetery.
And did everyone go to that burial?
Huh?
Did most of the people go to the burial?
Everybody was there.
Was your father there too, you think?
No, I don't think so. I just think that the boys and Edith, and I can't remember Edith being there. I imagine that maybe she had stayed home with Mother that day. But Miss Davis saw too that the boys, they rode with somebody else, but I rode with her. But the following morning at school, she asked something about if Mrs. Forbes was at the funeral. And then I said, well, there was a lady that got in the Surrey, and they said, and she said, no, that was some close relative, some other Forbes. It wasn't. Well, it so happened she was asking because that day the baby was born.
Yes. The day after the funeral?
The morning of the day after Neil's funeral. So Miss Ada, mother, the stepmother, was at the funeral at the house, but she didn't leave the house, you know, and that none of us seemed to be very sure, because Miss Davis wondered about it because she had already heard, but I didn't hear about the baby for several days. But I knew I didn't catch on what the discussion was at all. And that some of those things are very vivid in my thinking.
Yeah, in those days all birds were at home, weren't they? All birds were at home. The birthing process, all birds were at home. The babies were born at home. Most of them, weren't they?
Yes, I'm sure the baby was born at home.
And they had a midwife?
And he didn't live more than a week. And they, so that you can imagine what happened in the Forbes family. Well, the Forbes family, they were not strong, healthy people. And one after another like that, they died. And they had a lot of sadness connected with them. And then as time went on, and after Walter and Harold had grown up and had gone elsewhere, their stepmother, who was also their aunt Edie, she was there, and we visited with them. Now he did our thrashing, and while Harold was still home, he was the engineer, and I can remember sitting out on the on the engine with him, and feeling very much comfortable. I got along just fine there. I must have been at least 12 years old then, maybe a little older. I don't remember for sure. But at any rate, Harold and I were always very, very good friends. Well, as time went on, they had Madison and Edie had Virginia. She's now Virginia Banks, and I've got an envelope here. I'm writing her a letter. She lives in Boulder, and she's a very good friend of all of us. She'd write to Edith, and she wrote to George, and she told me this, that she had some of the letters that George had written to Edie and to her, and she had letters that Edith had written about situations in the Forbes family, things that they remembered. And she thought these letters were just too good to destroy. So she said, guess what? When I turned over all of this correspondence to the state of Colorado, they're all in the state historical. So both Edith and George have letters in the Forbes memorabilia.
In the state house, in the historical.
In the historical. And of course there's a new building, but I don't think they ever destroyed anything, because that was from the early days.
Yes.
That was things that they wouldn't destroy, I'm sure of that. Now a lot of people don't realize the satisfaction of knowing that, but that was just, Virginia just offhand just mentioned it. But they had never mentioned it before. So our family would never have known it excepting that.
Yes.
But Virginia and Marjorie, and then they have a brother. I believe that there was one boy that died. He was George Meredith Forbes.
He was the boy that died after Neil's funeral, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. No, not that first one.
Oh.
I think he was born later.
Wow.
Was another one. And then after that, the girls were born. So by that time, I think Edie was getting better medical attention, so that she was a stronger person, undoubtedly. But there is another George, a younger George, and she often mentions him in her letters. But I have only one very vague memory of him. As a little boy, I would judge maybe he was 5, 6 years old or something like that. I don't think I have any memory of it beyond that. And he lives, I almost think that he has lived in the Denver area, but he also has lived around the Great Lakes somewhere in one of those states. And she often comments about them getting together.
And earlier, before we started to tape this, you were telling that you wanted to explain something about the name, the Swede Ditch, the Risby.
Yeah.
The Swede Ditch, and also the origin of the Risby name. Would you want to do that?
Well, we'll mention the Risby name first. So many of those early settlers came from the little town in Sweden known Risby. And that's the way we pronounced it all the time out there. Russian town.
In Sweden, were they Russians? Were they immigrants? Or from?
No, I don't know what had given them the idea of choosing that. If there had been some pastor or somebody that had had some connection, so that I just don't know that at all.
But there is a Swedish town called Risby.
There's apparently there had been some of the Swedes that had gone to Russia and had kept in contact with them. But at any rate, the town, the community, kept that name. So that the pastor, whoever was the first pastor out in Risby, he brought that name with him.
I see.
And that's how it was. And then, of course, as time went on, they made this spelling into English, R-I-S-S-B-Y, Risby, and church. The church was built in 1879. That's what's on that picture. And sometime previous to that, the early settlers knew that they needed irrigation water. And of course the people got together and talked about it. So it might have been in the middle 70s when it first got talked about, 1875 perhaps. But at any rate, this gentleman who had some knowledge of the process of bringing water long distance, he had to have some knowledge of, well, I don't know what type of knowledge he would have had, but I remember hearing both Emma and Nellie talking about this man that had helped them in their process of building the Risby Church. And that was one of the earliest things that they did. They had to have water, and I don't know anything about what they did in regard to giving privilege from the state, but of course they had to have something. So there has to be some historical records of them. But but you see that Risby had to be 5-6 miles from Lyons.
When you say Risby, was there a little